Okay, welcome back again, everybody. Just checking to make sure I have my marker behind me there. I hope you're all having a good day wherever you're at, and whenever you're watching this. Thanks, as always, guys, for your continued focus on the course and on the lecture content. Today, you can tell I'm in a little bit of a different setting. I'm in one of the classrooms here at Orange Coast College just to deliver the recorded lecture today. So I'll have access to this big whiteboard. I don't know if I'll actually use it, but at any rate, we have the resources there just in case. And it's good to be with you guys in our new installment of World Religion. So today, the plan is that we're going to focus on finishing out our final lecture on the Chinese religious traditions and Chinese culture. We'll review these major elements from Coogan's book before we take a moment to look at the ideas of Huston Smith on this topic. So today's major topics are these. First of all, there's the sacred times of the Chinese religious traditions and in the Chinese religious calendar. So we'll also learn about the Chinese doctrines concerning death and the afterlife. And we'll close the Coogan Illustrated Guide to the World's Religions information by looking at the relationship of society and the Chinese religious traditions, society and religion. So after that, when we finish those three topics, I'd also like to refer to some of the interesting insights that Huston Smith has to offer from his book, our secondary text, The World's Religions. In particular, there are some parts of his book that has a nice discussion of Taoism and Confucianism. He had a separate discussion of Buddhism that we spent a lot of time talking about in the previous course unit. So the only new stuff that he has to offer us for these Chinese religious traditions is some analysis and commentary on Taoism and Confucianism, two of the three teachings that are considered central to Chinese religious thought. So with that, let's just get right into it, guys, and we'll begin today with our topic of sacred texts. Sorry, I meant to say sacred times, letter T, just threw me off, but sacred times, as you can see in the chat there, the first topic today. So the Chinese religions and culture use a complex calendar that combines both lunar and solar calendars into one. The lunar calendar is 12 periods, each timed to the appearance of the new moon. So, it's similar to the regular calendar where there's 12 months, except the cycle of each month is beginning and ending with the new moon of each cycle. So that's a 12-month calendar. The solar calendar, sometimes known as the agricultural calendar, it divides the year into 24 equal periods that begin and end with each equinox or solstice. So there's the winter solstice, the summer solstice, and then you have the spring and the autumn equinox. So the solar calendar divides the 4 periods of the year where these different equinoxes happen into 24 sections, and they each begin and end with one of these equinoxes or solstices. The incorporation of the lunar calendar reflects popular Chinese religious thought, which has the yin-yang metaphysics and cosmology. The moon, as we all know, has phases, meaning that sometimes it seems to wax and other times it seems to wane. So when you see a crescent moon, it's like the phase of the moon, if it were bigger before that, of it getting smaller. And as the size of the visible moon gets smaller over the course of one lunar phase, that's called waning. As it's waxing, that means that it's getting larger. So when it goes from crescent moon to half moon to gibbous to full moon, that's the waning phase of the moon. And in the Chinese religious cosmology of the popular religion, there's this idea that everything's made out of qi, and qi is constituted by two types of energy, yin and yang. And there's this idea that the moon, with its phases, is associated with those two types of yin-yang energy. Yin energy is associated with the waning of the moon as it gets smaller, and yang energy is associated with the waxing of the moon as it gets larger. So the changing of the moon's phases are therefore considered to have spiritual and supernatural importance. So the changing of the moon's phases is also timed to coincide with different religious festivals in China and in Chinese culture. Other festivals mark parts of the agricultural cycle. We see here that the perpetual cycle of growth, harvest, and decay, and then renewal is itself honored and revered in Chinese thought. So I know we talk about sacred times, as we've talked about all the different religions, but the concept of time itself and the way that it transforms things from old to new and then to new again, that itself is the subject matter of auspiciousness and religious importance and value to Chinese religious thought. Other celebrated themes in major festivals can include respect for one's ancestors, respect for one's family, or to achieve the blessings of the spirit world, or maybe just to avoid the harms that malevolent spiritual forces might do to us by keeping them at bay and placating the angry ghosts. Gods and goddesses in the celestial hierarchy are sometimes celebrated in the popular religion on their birthdays. So some of these deity figures are mythical, some are actual human beings that were appointed to the celestial bureaucracy because of their notable achievements in their life. And anyway, if there's some person or figure that's a member of the celestial empire, then on their birthday, there are also sometimes celebrations and festivals to honor them. On the topic of celebrated birthdays, Confucius' birthday of September the 28th is known as Teacher's Day. So that's a clear mention of a specific holiday and a sacred time, September 28th, Teacher's Day. And that is the day of Confucius' birthday. So people honor their teachers on those days and pay respects to people in the educational field. A nice, I think, cultural innovation of the Chinese, because after all, as I'm a teacher, I think that a lot of us deserve that respect. We work very hard for a lot of people, and it's reflected and valued in Chinese culture and religion as well. But perhaps the single most important holiday in the Chinese calendar is Chinese New Year, which is sometimes also called the Spring Festival. So Chinese New Year, or the less common name, Spring Festival. That begins on the first day of the first lunar month, which generally falls in our calendar somewhere between January 21st and February the 19th. Just before the Chinese New Year, the tradition has that a person cleans their home thoroughly, trying to clear away all the clutter and debris of the past year to sort of symbolize a fresh start and a fresh beginning to the new year. If it's possible, one also tries to settle any disputes and pay any debts that they have outstanding as the new year begins, and families convene and gather together as a family unit. That reminds me a little bit of some of the practices of the Jewish holidays, especially the Days of Awe, when a person is supposed to ask for forgiveness and to forgive others for their transgressions, to sort of start the year on a clean balance of I guess, harmony with other people in the Jewish community. So we see similar features and cross currents among many of these different traditions. Interesting to see that as sort of universal human aspirations and goals, despite the differences of culture and destination and location. The account of the old year is sent to heaven with the kitchen god. Now, I don't think I mentioned this divine figure last time, so I want to kind of talk about it a bit. So included in the celestial hierarchy of the popular religion, the imperial bureaucracy of the gods, there's one god known as the kitchen god with a specific name, Zhao Jun. So that is the kitchen god. I talked to you guys about the local god, the Tudigong. Another in the pantheon in the celestial hierarchy is Zhao Jun. And he's known as the god of kitchen and the family. He has an important task in Chinese popular religious thought to mediate between the family and the celestial bureaucracy. So this annual report of the family's year is given over to Zhao Jun, and then according to legend, he sends it all the way up to the top of the hierarchy to the Jade Emperor, and then they evaluate the quality, the work, the moral behavior of the family, and apportion whatever blessings or burdens that are appropriate to their record. How can we send a message to the Jade Emperor through the intermediary of the kitchen god, Zhao Jun. Well, they do this by burning a little effigy of Zhao Jun. So, like a paper or other material is used to create a likeness of the kitchen god. It's then burned on the home altar, which is an important staple of a traditional Chinese household. The home altar, we'll talk more about in a moment, but this effigy of Zhao Jun is burned, and that's supposed to send in the smoke up to the celestial realm the message that is going to be conveyed by him to the Jade Emperor, the high god of the celestial empire. Anyways, during Chinese New Year, the house is cleaned, debts are settled, and Zhao Jun is sent off with that message. The color red is also seen everywhere because it's regarded in the Chinese culture as the luckiest of all colors. So you'll see these kind of very impressive looking red doors and, red, I guess, festive items of all types, just populating the streets and populating different New Year's celebrations. The family on New Year's traditionally gathers for a meal, and they make table settings. They make table settings not just for themselves, but also for the beloved deceased family members or ancestors that they want to honor. The family talks throughout the night as a family, sharing stories and sharing hopes and dreams for the next year. There's this practice that in those conversations, the family tries not to use any unlucky words, and they try to avoid unlucky topics, which generally are negative topics that don't conduce to the happiness and harmony of the family unit. Some people that are very, I guess, traditional in the way they observe this holiday even shut doors to try and keep out malevolent spirits or ghosts, and then they'll reopen those doors after New Year's Day arrives, just keeping them at bay so that the new year can start without their influence. For the first 2 days of New Year, many people don't work, and many people say also that you shouldn't sweep or use a blade because another cultural belief in the Chinese religious traditions is that you could sweep away or cut away the good luck that's been accumulated around the New Year holiday. So you don't want to sweep that stuff away. So you're not supposed to broom or use blades for those first 2 days at least. New Year celebrations end with what's called the Lantern Festival. So here's just another holiday that is in the Chinese religious calendar, the Lantern Festival. So that's the event that marks the end of the big New Year's festivities. And the Lantern Festival occurs on the first full moon of the first lunar month of the new year. So at that time, crowds gather with decorative lanterns, these kind of beautiful and ornate lanterns. And they also watch street performers, costumed dancers, like, for example, stilt walkers will walk during festive processions on the Lantern Festival. It's also believed that when New Year arrives, yin power is at its peak. That's right at the end of the winter solstice. So yin is like at its highest ascendancy, and the yang power is just starting to ascend again. So with the cycles of the seasons, as the seasons grow colder and less conducive to the growth or harvest of plants, that's yin energy taking over. And as we get into the warmer months and the spring and summer months and so forth, that's when yang energy is reaching its higher potential. And they say that yin energy peaks during the winter solstice, yang energy peaks during the summer solstice 6 months later, when it's, of course, the hottest time of the year with the longest days. Yin energy is at its peak when the days are coldest, and it's the shortest part of the year with respect to how much daylight hours there are. So there's also later in the calendar what's known as the Clear and Bright Festival. That's the English word for it, but in Chinese it's Qingming. So here we go. And that one happens 2 weeks after spring equinox. So the spring equinox is right around, mid-March in our calendar. So 2 weeks after that time of year, there's the Clear and Bright Festival. And what happens in that case is that they celebrate and honor one's ancestors. It's all about reverence and honor of the ancestors of the family. Sometimes the family will make a group trip to a grave of notable ancestors and make offerings to those, honored and respected ancestors. There's also two other major festivals that bear mention. One is the Double Fifth. Okay. The Double Fifth is called Double Fifth because it falls on the fifth day of the fifth lunar month. Okay. So double fifth, it's not May the 5th as in our calendar, but it's the fifth lunar month. If we had a May 5th holiday and we called it the Double Fifth, you would understand that it's on 5/5. So it's called the Double Fifth, and 5 is a numerologically significant number in Chinese tradition. They have the idea of the 5 toxins and the 5 colors. So pentads, which are groupings of 5, are supposed to be auspicious, and there's a heavy use of them in reference to them during the Double Fifth festival and holiday. At this time, yang power is believed to be coming closer to its peak in the annual cycle. And in the historical past, this was the time of year when a lot of different epidemic illnesses would afflict the Chinese population. So to commemorate the struggles to overcome these epidemics that happened around this time of year, on the Double Fifth day, some people will hang medical herbs and grasses from their doors to sort of indicate the desire to ward off illness and disease. As I was saying, 5 is an important number in the traditional Chinese numerology of the popular religion. And the Double Fifth makes abundant imagery of pentads. For example, there are considered to be the 5 poisons and the 5 colors. For the festival, images of the 5 poisons are displayed on clothing and food, and these poisons are believed to be things that can repel danger and harm with the toxins that they have. So that's why they're part of the celebration and part of the festivity. The Double Fifth also celebrates the onset of heavy rains, which were also a part of the agricultural season that happened around this time of year. In the popular religion, mythical dragons would help to secure the rain for the Chinese people, and so sometimes you'll see, effigies of dragons and ornamental dragons flown around and displayed in public to also give memory and honor to that aspect of the Double Fifth, that it coincides with the rainy part of the agricultural season, which is actually quite important to the production of rice, a major staple of Chinese agriculture and diet. Another major festival that we can also refer to is known as the Mid-Autumn Festival. Okay, the Mid-Autumn Festival, that occurs on the full moon of the 8th lunar month. Okay, the Mid-Autumn Festival. It celebrates the harvest time, so that's its main role, the time when people harvest fruits and vegetables for agricultural use. It's also a time that celebrates the moon and the never-ending pursuit of longevity and immortality. People on the harvest festival, the Mid-Autumn Festival, traditionally will eat round fruits or moon cakes, again, rounded in shape to sort of signify reverence and respect for the moon. It's all about lunar themes, so there's a lot of moon imagery. Most of all, these Chinese religious and cultural festivities focus on the community or the family. The two most important rites of passage, so these are also sacred times, not holidays or festivals, but just times in a person's life cycle that are considered to be auspicious or infused with religious meaning. The two most important times in an individual's life are marriage, which ensures the continuation of the family, since family is such a central value in Chinese thought. The perpetuation of family through marriage is considered to be very important. So marriage is one of the big events in life, and then death is the other one, the moment where a person becomes an ancestor and forever honored by the family. Of course, that's only in death that one can become an ancestor as opposed to a living relative. Now, about marriage. In traditional marriage, the couple bows before ancestral tablets of the groom, which is supposed to introduce the bride to the husband's ancestors. we'll talk about these ancestral tablets, but these are tablets that are kept by a family, and it's believed that the ghosts of their deceased ancestors reside in these tablets, and that's how they maintain presence in the family home, and how they also maintain influence over current events that are happening to the family. So when a marriage happens, the bride would often bow before the ancestral tablets of the husband's family to bring her into the family and to quote unquote introduce her to the longstanding ancestors that are in it. This again reflects the concern to maintain links between the living and dead, respect for family, and respect for elders, all important cultural principles and values in Chinese thought. It's also to attain the blessings of the ancestors. These ancestors are believed to be able to exert a positive or negative influence on events happening in the world now with the living. So you want to win their favor. That's achieved by paying respects and honor to them. A significant birthday in a human's life, according to Chinese thought, is their 60th birthday. That's believed to be because there's a full cycle of time that is completed every 60 years. Some of you may have heard that in the Chinese calendar, there's also all these other interesting ways of keeping track of the decades, like there's the year of the dragon, the year of the rat, the year of the monkey, and all the rest. There's a larger cycle of time that is a 60-year cycle. That's considered to be a complete cycle of time. And because a person who survives for 60 years has lived through the duration of one cycle of time, there's a big celebration and important, cultural recognition of their 60th birthday. You know, in our culture, I guess there's the sweet 16 for some people, and a lot of people celebrate being 18 or 21. They're kind of clustered up a little bit younger in the timeline of a person's life. But in the Chinese culture, with all of its reverence and respect for elders and ancestors, also with their interesting method of timekeeping in their calendar, it's 60. That's the most auspicious birthday. Now, as mentioned last time, worship of the great cosmic forces and the Jade Emperor were considered to be the sole privilege and the sole obligation of the Emperor of China. So it's not like everybody's supposed to pray to the Jade Emperor or to give offerings to him, because he's so far up in the celestial hierarchy that he can only be accessed by either intermediaries or by people that are extremely highly ranked in the terrestrial bureaucracy of China. So the Emperor of China would be the son of heaven, according to tradition and belief. And this person was given the sole authority to make offerings at the temple that corresponds to the relevant deity, the highest deities like the Jade Emperor. So the emperor, the actual earthly emperor, would make offerings at a couple of different major temples at significant parts of the year. For the spring equinox, they would go to the temple of the sun and make offerings. For the summer solstice, they would go to the temple of earth and make offerings in that case. For the autumn equinox, they would go to the temple of the moon. As we've said before, the Mid-Autumn Festival celebrates the moon and all things lunar. And so in keeping with that kind of time period of the year, there is a trip to the temple of the moon by the emperor on the autumn equinox to make some offerings then. And then there's the temple of heaven on the winter solstice. During the Clear and Bright Festival, the Qingming Festival, the emperor was supposed to also go to make sacrifices, but in this case to their own ancestors, past emperors, and also the legendary culture heroes of the ancient Chinese history. So that kind of ends our overview of some of the notable sacred times of the Chinese religion. And like I said, to start our meeting, our next topic is all about death and the afterlife and the interesting views about it that we can also find in Chinese religious thought. So as we've discussed, Chinese thought tends to prefer synthesis rather than conflict. For that reason, Chinese ideas about death and the afterlife draw inspiration from all the different major religious traditions. At least, I should say, regarding Taoism, Buddhism, and the popular religion, there's a lot of overlap. And many Chinese religious thinkers will embrace elements of all of those when they think about death and the afterlife. Confucianism, on the other hand, does not actually have a primary concern with belief in the afterlife or with the condition of the soul in the afterlife. It's much more focused on the earthly life that we have and the bonds that we're supposed to honor and the social harmony that we're supposed to advance in the world that we're living in. So they don't really talk much about the afterlife and those aspects of religion, but a lot of people have pointed out that they do have such a powerful emphasis. Confucian thought has such a powerful emphasis on the value of filial piety and honor and respect for one's family and ancestors. And that has actually had some indirect influence on the popular understanding of the responsibility that the living have to their ancestors. So even though it doesn't have a primary concern with death in the afterlife, the Confucian emphasis on honor of one's family bleeds over into some religious thinking about how you should honor your deceased ancestors, even, with these offerings and so forth that you would give to them. Over the centuries, the sharp lines that might have once distinguished Buddhist from indigenous Chinese teachings about life after death have somewhat become blurred. To many Chinese people, funerary practices, like things that you do at a funeral, are more important than the doctrinal beliefs associated with them, because the ritual is supposed to simply express respect for the family, unity of the family, or the community, regardless of whether you're coming to it from a more Buddhist or a more Taoist or a more Chinese popular religion perspective. It doesn't seem to matter as much what motive you have for honoring the deceased ancestor. The practice of making such honor apparent is the primary thing, and that's something that Chinese people don't necessarily find contradictory or problematic. The main thing is to honor the family and the community, and whatever motive brings you to that, whether it's from a Taoist basis, Buddhist basis, or otherwise, it's all good. Pervasive in Chinese thought about death is the view that the dead are not far from us, that they're not distant at all. In fact, they are believed to persist as ghosts who can have either a great positive or negative influence on our lives and on events that are happening now. So piety to these ghosts and ancestors requires a couple of things: a proper burial, but also regular sacrifices and offerings that are made to them. If these ghosts are treated in this respectful and proper way, then they become benevolent ancestors that can bestow blessings on you, like fertility or wealth or professional success or whatever. But if they're not properly cared for or neglected, then the tradition teaches that they can become malevolent and dangerous, and they can haunt us, and etc. Another case where they could become these malevolent ghosts instead of benevolent ancestors would be if they died in a violent way or in a very premature way. So those are different cases where it's thought that sometimes the ghost of the deceased turns into a force for harm instead of for good. In the Chinese traditional cosmology, all things are made from the same material, which is qi, and which is expressed in its two basic forms of yin energy and yang energy. So even the living and the spirit world are both composed out of qi, just in different combinations and forms, one in a spiritual form and one in a material form like this. So based on this, the line between the two realms, the spirit realm and the terrestrial realm, it's considered to be indefinite and fluid, because after all things are made out of the common same substance. This kind of monism, the view that everything's made out of just one type of substance, leads to the idea that there's more of a connection and a unity between us and even the ghost world. Based on yin-yang cosmology and qi, it's traditionally believed that each person has two kinds of soul. So this is interesting, two kinds of soul. So one of those two, it's called the the Hun soul. And the other, it's known as the Po soul. Hun soul, Po soul. Here's the difference between the two. The Hun soul is made up of Yang Qi. And the Po soul, the other one's made up of Yin. So the Hun soul with Yang is the intellectual part of the soul. And at death, they say that it leaves the body and that it ascends, that it goes up. Eventually, this Hun soul with Yang energy takes residence in the ancestral tablets that I briefly mentioned earlier. So more on the ancestral tablets. In a traditional home, these tablets, which are made of stone, are kept. And what they show on them is the name, the birthday, and the death date of a particular ancestor that has died, and also the number of sons that that person had, if any. So the family of the senior male of the household are those whose tablets are typically kept in that home. So, like if you were a man and you had a wife, it would be you, the male household leader, whose ancestors would have their tablets in that household. Um, Sometimes they would say that if no children were produced by the married couple, that the woman's family ancestral tablets could be included in the household as well, kind of illustrating there some uh, gender inequality that exists in traditional Chinese thought. But that's, of course, something that we've seen throughout all global cultures, including our own in some way. So the family of the senior male have these tablets in the household of that senior male, which are supposed to be the place where these deceased ancestors literally go and take residence. So the ghost finds itself in that tablet. And the tablets go back for 3 to 5 generations. Now, eventually, the oldest generation of tablets held in the home have to be taken out because a new generation comes in and an older one passes away. So the oldest tablet in the current group, as each new generation passes away, is removed from the home and then it's placed in an ancestral hall. And this ancestral hall is used by several households of the same extended family. And that's where really, really old ancestors have the tablets placed that go back further in time than the past 3 to 5 generations. At the ancestral hall, there's also respects that are paid to the ancestors, but it's a little bit more formal and it's less sentimental, unlike the more recently departed whose tablets remain in the household. And there's a little bit more sort of emotional expressiveness associated with paying respects and honor to those. Again, what this shows, this practice of the ancestral tablets, is that the Chinese culture and religion places amazing value on maintaining dedication and loyalty, piety to your family, and to maintaining family unity even after death. So much emphasis is put toward the maintenance of families and the respect for one's elders and ancestors, that they continue to receive respect and honor even after death, and the family unit stays together even after members have gone, to death. The other kind of soul just mentioned, the Po soul, is made up of yin qi. And they say that it sinks into the ground and remains with the body instead of ascending up into the heavens. Now, if a burial is not performed correctly, or again, if the death was premature or violent, or again, if the soul is not properly cared for by being given offerings and it's so on, then the Hun soul won't rise and take root in the ancestral tablets, and the Po soul won't descend into the grave. In that case, when these things are not properly done, they would instead haunt the living as a malicious ghost until they've been satisfied or rectified in some way. So the living, therefore, bear a constant and serious obligation to the dead in Chinese religious thought. According to popular tradition, the living must provide the dead with offerings to make them comfortable and at ease. So on the family's home altar, offerings are sometimes given of these things: food, incense, or other useful items. To offer food, you might wonder, how am I going to give food to a ghost? Well, the food is simply placed on the home altar, and according to the traditional Chinese belief, the ancestor consumes it, but only consumes its spiritual essence, and they leave behind the material husk, which then the family can consume. So, I mean, it's like nothing actually happens to the food that's sitting there, but the belief is that it's somehow been spiritually consumed by these dead ancestors, and then the material part that has matter and form is what the human living family gets to eat and still use. What about the burning of incense? There's incense that is supposed to be burned twice a day at the home altar as a sort of perpetual revolving act of honor and reverence toward these deceased ancestors as well. So that's the incense part. What about the useful items? Okay, so suppose that you want to send something up into the spirit realm for your deceased ancestor, but something really practical, like, for example, you want to give them a car or furniture. You can also send them those things, but the way of doing it is that you create a paper version of that object, like a little, I don't know, almost origami. And then that thing is placed on the home altar, and it's burned. So it's believed that it turns to smoke and it ascends into the celestial realm as smoke, where then it becomes something that's useful to the spirit. Sometimes there's even the act of sending money to the deceased ancestor. So interesting, because you see here that the concept of practical affairs and social affairs really bleed into Chinese religious thought, so much so that, in a spiritual realm where you would think there's no such thing as finance or markets or consumer spending, nonetheless there is a belief that the spirit can benefit from having money sent up there. So you just create this fake spirit money, which is also set fire, and then that is another thing that can be delivered up into the celestial abode in that way. As I said, incense is burned twice daily, and all these other offerings are given on the new and the full moon. So that's 2 times in each lunar cycle. Other times when you would honor and commemorate these ancestral ghosts would be on specific holidays, on the anniversary of the ancestor's death. They're also indulged with these extra things beyond just the incense on those days. So incense is kind of like the baseline level of honor and care. And then these more, I guess, involved acts of offering, like whether it be food, items, or even money, those are reserved for the holidays, anniversaries, and event that marks the ancestor's death. These rituals are supposed to ensure blessings and also to display respect and honor for the family. In keeping with the strong tendency in Chinese tradition to synthesize things into one harmonious whole, there are sometimes, and to some degree, contradictory doctrines about the outcome of the soul after death. So there's not only one single story or narrative that's given about how the soul proceeds after death. They kind of take an, one size fits all, all embracing approach where they incorporate elements of the various teachings and traditions that we've talked about into one. So, for example, it's believed that the Po soul, the one that remains with the body, as well as sinking into the ground with the dead person's body, they also say sometimes that it descends into the underworld, where it will be judged for its sins before it's punished for some time and eventually reincarnated. It's interesting to notice that this idea of the Po soul going to the underworld, being judged, and if necessary, punished before reincarnation, this doctrine of reincarnation existed in Chinese thought, and it existed in that indigenous Chinese religion well before Buddhism arrived in China in the 1st century ACE. So that shows that Buddhism and traditional Chinese religious thought had at least some common themes. And that's perhaps why Buddhism was able to find such a receptive audience and culture in China, because it was presenting a view that was already similar to something that was a trademark of their own worldview before. What distinctive thing that Buddhism added to the idea of death and etc. was the notion of karma and the balance of karmic merit that could be discharged or exhausted by the actions of one's life. Also, in some of the Buddhist traditions, they talked about different levels of hell, where different types of punishment would be awarded to people who had certain types of negative karma. So that also kind of got appropriated in Chinese religious culture and belief. Exceptionally outstanding and moral people in the Chinese tradition may enter the celestial bureaucracy as a deity, as a kind of minor god, rather than being reincarnated again. So if you've lived a great life and you've done a lot of good things morally and you've served others, then maybe you don't get reincarnated at all, but instead you go into that legendary celestial bureaucracy as a deity. It's interesting, we keep talking about the celestial bureaucracy, and it's really intended to be a close parallel and analogy to a real life world bureaucracy, like a government or a business or a corporation that has its own sort of team of, managers and staffers and low-level employees. So much similar is the idea of an imperial and a celestial bureaucracy that that it has some of the same shortcomings. For example, any bureaucracy can have these problems: errors, paperwork, nepotism, being too formal, sometimes having corruption or incompetence. And the same things can be seen in the celestial bureaucracy of the Chinese traditional religion. For example, one funny kind of example is that sometimes there's been stories about a clerical error or an accounting mistake, which accidentally caused someone to be condemned to hell that didn't deserve it, and they had to suffer through that until the mistake was discovered later and corrected. Just like things that you can imagine happening in the real world bureaucracies, DMV prints your name wrong or something, or puts the wrong birth date on your driver's license, or whatever, and then you have to go through like a whole bunch of hoops and hurdles to get that corrected, or to get some officer to recognize the mistake and process the paperwork. So the same kind of frustrations and limits that we see in real world bureaucracies can also sometimes be found in the celestial bureaucracy too, according to tradition anyway. So that now brings us through the views of death and the afterlife. And the last part of Coogan's discussion to finish this out will be his views and his analysis anyway of the relationship of society and religion in the Chinese traditions. Okay. So all of the three teachings of Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism, as well as the popular religion, have influenced the nature of Chinese society and its values. Out of all of them, though, it is Confucianism that has had the single greatest impact in structuring the norms and values of the Chinese approach to the state and the family. The state and the family are the two most important elements in Chinese society and culture. So therefore, Confucianism's importance can't be overstated because it focuses on and highlights those two things, maintaining and stabilizing and harmonizing the nature of the family unit and the society that is formed from all the little family units. The ideal in Confucianism is wise ethical rule for the benefit of all members of society. So to have wise rulers that operate from a place of morality, and that they do this not for their own sake, but to benefit the entire society. This is the core idea of how to manage the state in imperial China, to have beneficent and wise rulers that care for the harmony of the whole society. Emperors were aware that their reign would be evaluated according to the Confucian standards, and that this would determine their historical legacy and their place in history. So everybody was quite concerned to live up to the values and doctrines put forward by Confucian thought. As we've mentioned before, all government officials in the Chinese bureaucracy would be required to take exams and tests to evaluate their knowledge and their allegiance to Confucian values. The Chinese saw the relationship between the emperor and the subject in the kingdom as parallel to the relationship of father and son. For example, children, according to Confucian thought, owe total obedience and respect to their parents and to care for their spirits when they die. And the same is supposed to be true of the subject with regard to the emperor that rules over them. They should have obedience like a son does to their father, honor them, care for them, and respect them. In traditional Chinese law, this asymmetric relationship between the superior member of the dynamic and the inferior is reflected in the fact that the law would say, at least traditionally, perhaps not any longer, that a father was legally permitted to kill a child that was disobedient. But if a child just so much as strikes the father, that is something that they could be penalized with death for. Traditional Chinese society was, of course, authoritarian, and it was based on a very strict social hierarchy. This kind of top-down idea that you have to give deference to those that are in the more well-placed position or the more justly recognized position, whether that's father to son, husband to wife, ruler to subject. Confucian thought held that each member of the family had a given role and set of duties. Women, according to Chinese popular thought, possess yin energy, and that means that they should be more nurturing and non-confrontational, as according to yin energy. Males were said to have predominantly yang energy, which is supposed to be more dynamic and more assertive, so that gives them license to be more assertive and dynamic as men. Women were subordinated to men according to this traditional way of thinking. They would be expected socially to obey their fathers, and then when they became adults, they should obey their husbands. And then when they became older mothers, they should follow and listen to the counsel of their sons. So the married woman is supposed to show filial piety to her own family, but also she's supposed to show, as I mentioned before, filial piety and honor and reverence to the husband's parents and to their extended family. In modern China, this emphasis on family unity and parent-child dynamics continues to the present day, but it has diminished a little bit and become less emphasized in the 20th century since there was a communist revolution, a cultural revolution led by Mao Zedong from 1966 to 1976. So let me put that here. So Mao Zedong was an authoritarian ruler who presided over a period known as the Cultural Revolution. This really kind of established a strong communist political and social philosophy in China. And it challenged some of the long-held Confucian traditions because they said that if you're a child or a junior to some elder, you should reject them if they're not going to be sufficiently supportive of the revolution. So this is where like two values really came into conflict: the traditional value of honor and respect for one's family. On the other hand, this communist idea that the power of the state is supreme and needs to be respected above all. And if anything gets in the way of that, including loyalty to one's family, then that means that this is not a supportive enough member of the Revolutionary Party. This idea never fully replaced the traditional ways because of the deep historical connection to the Confucian values and just the Chinese association with filial piety in general, which remains to this day. But it did change in some ways the social perspective on it. Taoism and Buddhism have also offered some other perspectives on society. Taoism affirms the ideal of retreating into nature to escape city life. And the pursuit of longevity seen in Taoism is also reflected in contemporary martial arts that some people perform, like, for example, Tai Chi. Those types of martial arts aim to condition and strengthen the mind and the body. And so they're kind of consistent with the philosophical Taoist goal of longevity in this sort of, I would say, futile pursuit of immortality. Philosophical Taoism is also important to Chinese women because, unlike Confucianism, it celebrates the female and it celebrates yin energy, whereas it's kind of subordinated to yang energy and to males in Confucian traditional thought. So that's a nice alternative philosophical way to approach the world for Chinese women that would feel perhaps more oppressed or less free under the strict Confucian social hierarchy. Buddhism is also often used for funerals and ceremonies because of its focus on securing a good rebirth for the soul. And in some sects of Buddhism, an opportunity for salvation, like, for example, the Pure Land version of Buddhism associated with Amitabha, the Buddha of light. It also offers an alternative to the Confucian hierarchy, which places women lower, because in Buddhism, the pursuit of nirvana is universal to all and accessible to all who become enlightened, regardless of their gender identity. Now, in modern China, again, it's believed by the Communist Party that the religious traditions are somewhat unmodern, and that in some cases they may hold back social progress and modernization. You see, in the 19th century, there were a lot of encounters between the West and China, where the West predominated over China in trade wars and in actual military conflicts and stuff. So there were discussions that led into the 20th century about how maybe China needs to reform and become more modernized and more industrialized. Some people in the higher circles of opinion during those times in China thought that the reliance on the old, outmoded religious ways of thinking was somehow holding modernization back. So those religious traditions have definitely been more under attack in the past 75 years or so with the Communist Revolution than at any previous point in Chinese history. But nonetheless, those ideals remain. Confucian ideals especially have been even adapted by some communist reformers, because as much as Confucianism emphasizes filial piety and reverence for the family, it does ask us to work for the good of a collective and not to focus only on the individual. And so that element of Confucian thought can be sort of merged with communist thought. which again prioritizes what's good for the state above the individual at all levels. So I guess that's really the end of our notes then on the society and religion component of this final lesson on the Chinese traditions. Now I just want to turn to a few notable things that were discussed by Huston Smith, the other author for our course, in his secondary textbook for us, The World's Religions. He has some interesting commentary on Taoism and Confucianism, so I just wanted to add a little of that to today's discussion. All right, so Huston Smith gives interesting additional info and context about Taoism. So here's just some interesting, supplementary information about that to add to what we already know. Lao Tzu was the founder of Taoism. I know I've said that before, but I'll just put it here again to make it clear. And he was born in 604 BCE. Okay, Lao Tzu. Now, about Lao Tzu, there are some scholars that debate whether he's a real historical figure or whether he's just a creation of myth or legend. Part of the reason that he's sometimes thought not to have been a real figure is because his actual name, Lao Tzu, is not really a name. It translates to a description, which is the old boy. The old boy. So, I mean, the old boy is a description of somebody, perhaps a nickname or something, but not an actual name. So some wonder whether or not that just shows that it's the creation of legend. But we do at least have some legendary stories about him, and clearly some of them are mythical, but others seem to be more realistic. Like some of the mythical stories are that he was in his mother's womb for 80 years, and then he was born a fully formed, wise old man with gray hair. But obviously that can't be true. Others seem a little more realistic, like the story that he worked in the government for a time in his life, that he's from a western province of China. In many accounts, what the themes that can be agreed on is that he's described as being very wise, but also a bit mysterious and enigmatic and hard to sometimes interpret in the way he talked. It's said that after he became disappointed with his attempts to work in government, he decided to retreat to the forest to seek religious solitude. As he was making that trek from the city to the outlands, he comes to a western pass, and a gatekeeper asks him to leave behind a record of his beliefs before he exits from the civilization. 3 days later, he returns back to the gatekeeper, according to the story, and he has this little manuscript, which is the Tao Te Ching. So that's the main religious sacred text of Taoism. And this is the origin story of it, that Lao Tzu was just told, can you please write us something before you go to the forest and leave us behind forever? And he's like, okay. So he came back 3 days, I should say, later, and he had the Tao Te Ching right there. What Tao Te Ching means is the way and its power. So the Tao is the way, the Ching is its power. So the way and its power, the Tao Te Ching. So the old boy, Lao Tzu, he didn't proselytize, meaning he didn't try to be a missionary. He didn't go out there and organize to try and make as many people as possible into Taoists. Instead, he just wrote this text at somebody else's request, not even through his own initiative, because he was asked to do it. He gives it, and then he just rides off into the sunset. That's a much different life story than those we've studied from, say, other dedicated missionary figures and founding figures of religions. When it was Jesus or the Buddha or the Prophet Muhammad, these people spent their lives or significant parts of them trying to spread a religious message and to attract as many followers as possible. But that wasn't the concern of the old boy, of Lao Tzu. So he's much different also even from Confucius, who tried to get government officials to implement his ideas. Although he had not got much success in that, he made a 13-year effort traveling around and trying to propose policies for governance to different high rulers. Now, Smith explains further that Tao can be understood in 3 possible ways: the way of ultimate reality, the way of the universe, and the way of human life. The first, the way of ultimate reality, is unspeakable and ambiguous and abstract. It's like the ultimate grounds of reality and being itself. It's something that cannot be clearly articulated, but it's fundamental and primordial. The second, the Tao of the universe, is all about nature and the way that nature flows and creates and destroys. And the third is about man and how man should mesh with both the universe and ultimate reality. To mesh with the way of the universe and ultimate reality, you're supposed to practice Wu Wei, which means non-interference. I know we've talked about that before, but it's such an important Taoist concept. So I'm putting it right there again. Non-interference. Non-interference with what? With the way of nature and with the way of the universe. I find that he had a good description of this concept on page 208 of his book. So I'm just reading from it, and it says, Wu Wei is supreme action, precious suppleness, simplicity, and freedom that flows from us or through us when our private ego and conscious efforts yield to a power not their own. In a way, it is opposite from the ideas of Confucius. Confucius turned every effort to building a pattern of ideal responses that might be consciously imitated. Taoism's approach is the opposite, to get the foundation of the self in tune with Tao and let behavior flow spontaneously. Action follows being, new action will follow new being, wiser being, stronger being. Okay? So, to act in this way is to be supple, simple, and flowing freely, almost to coin a metaphor like water. To act in this way is to have a life without tension, no wasted motion, but pure efficiency. Another interesting passage from the Tao Te Ching says, keep stretching a bow, you repent of the pull. A whetted saw grows thin and dull. So it's like if you're pulling on this bow and arrow so hard, you're getting tense, you're stretching it, and you're getting tired as you do it. Now you're not going to have the truest motion carried forward with it when you release it. So everything's supposed to be graceful, effortless, simple, and pure efficiency. A famous parable of this concept is the story of a cook named Wen Hui. So to give a sense of this kind of mode of action of non-interference and the way that you're supposed to move through reality and through your life to adhere to it, it's expressed in one interesting parable of the chef Wen Hui. So this chef was a person which had a knife, and he would cut up an ox to turn it into meat, like a butcher would do. But he was so skilled in the way that he would cleave the ox that he gave almost no effort, and the knife never became dull, despite so many repeated uses of it in this, difficult task that would ordinarily dull a knife. And also, the big and lumbering body of the ox, you would think, oh, that's going to be a real chore to chop through it and cleave it from part to part. But he would just talk about, you find the perfect spot in between the joints and you can cleave this thing and it just almost falls apart, like as if it was, butter or something. So think about that mode of action, effortless, no effort, but yet achieving all that you desire. And it says here, his cleaver never seemed to lose its edge. When he cut an ox, out went a hand, down went a shoulder. He planted a foot, he pressed with a knee, and the ox fell apart with a whisper. The bright cleaver murmured like a gentle wind, rhythm, timing like a sacred dance. The cook said, there are spaces in the joints. The blade is thin and keen. When this thinness finds that space, there is all the room you need. It goes like a breeze. Therefore, I have this cleaver 19 years as if it has just newly been sharpened. So that unforced, unbothered, kind of effortless way of being, in tune with nature and flowing with it and its pattern. This is the way of the Tao. It's a complex concept, and I'm trying my best to express it in these ways. And these parables help give some voice or expression to it. As I've said, another metaphor to explain the same is that we should try and attain the characteristic of water in the way that we act. And that's also described by Smith on page 209. He says, water was the closest parallel to the Tao in the natural world. It's a close prototype to Wu Wei. Notice the way water adapts itself to its surroundings and seek out the lowest places. Lao Tzu says, the supreme good is like water, which nourishes all things without trying to. It is content with the low places that people disdain. Thus, it is like the Tao. And then Smith comments, despite its accommodation, water holds a power unknown to hard and brittle things. In a stream, it flows from the stone's sharp edges, only to turn them into pebbles, rounded to conform to its streamlined flow. It's working its way past frontiers and under walls. Its gentle current melts rocks and carries away the proud hills that we would think were eternal. So despite its gentle, unforced, and accommodating nature and its adaptive nature, it has great power to shape things that appear in its midst, that it bears influence on. Taoism also rejects such things as competition and egoism, because that's when you're forcing things, and that's when you are trying too hard, and that's when you're interfering with the way of nature. That's also talked about on page 211 and 12, where he says, "He who stands on tiptoe does not stand firm. He who rushes ahead does not go far. He who tries to shine dims his own light, and the axe falls first on the tallest tree. Those who would take over the earth and shape it to their will never, I notice, succeed. The earth is like a vessel so sacred that at the mere approach of the profane it is marred, and when they reach out their fingers, it is gone." So Taoism preaches the message that we should befriend and merge with nature, not try to overpower and dominate it or anything else. Taoism also tries to emphasize respect and appreciation for all aspects of nature, including creation and destruction of life, as both equal parts of one natural way. So death is not feared, it's not attached with a negative connotation. It's instead thought to be a complementary part of the process of creation that gives life as well. And so, interestingly, people are not necessarily going to mourn the dead in the case of Taoism because they believe that it's just part of life and nature's cycle, which we need to appreciate and not interfere with. It says here, when Chuang Tzu's wife died, his friend Hui Tzu visited him to express his condolences, only to find Chuang Tzu sitting on the ground with his legs spread, singing and whacking out a tune on a wooden bowl. His friend said, "She lived with you so devotedly all these years. For you not to even shed a tear would have been bad enough, but I see that you're singing and drumming. That's just too much." Chuang Tzu said, "You're misjudging me. When she died, I was in despair, as any man might be. But then I realized that before she was born, she had no body. And it became clear to me that the same process of change that brought her to birth eventually brought her to death. If someone is tired and has gone to lie down, we don't pursue them with hooting and hollering. She whom I have lost has laid down to sleep for a while in the chamber between heaven and earth. To wail and groan while she sleeps would be to deny nature's sovereign law." So nature provides all that we need. It takes things away, but it's all part of the same perpetual process of creation and destruction that must be appreciated and honored. Finally, just a few small supplemental remarks from Smith on Confucianism. So Confucius was born in 551 BCE. He was from a poor family. His father died before he even turned 3 years old, and so that left him to the care of his mother, who was poor but very loving and affectionate. He had to make his own way through life, and that experience made him relate to common people, and that's sort of reflected in the social orientation of his philosophy, which tries to create social harmony for all and not just for some. During his career, he served as a government officer, and then he spent 13 years wandering from state to state, trying to influence leaders and rulers about how to improve their methods of governance. But he was generally ignored and in some cases even ridiculed. After failing in that effort, he didn't give up completely. He had attracted some devoted followers, at least. He was considered a wise teacher in many subjects across all academic disciplines, and he dedicated his last years to editing the 6 classics that we talked about in the last lecture. He taught us, and he taught the world, that to achieve harmony and social cohesion, which, by the way, was a problem during his lifetime in pre-imperial China, that we would need to not just use force, as some had argued, like how the legalists had wanted, nor to just have the more utopian view that love will conquer all, but rather something in the middle. He believed in a concept of deliberate tradition. So deliberate tradition. So meaning by that, tradition that is not just done unconsciously or informally, but rather that is deliberately instilled into all members of society through education, through culture, consciously attended to, not just spontaneous or informal. It has to be done deliberately to counteract a natural human tendency towards a kind of toxic individualism that he thought that we would fall into unless we cultivated this adherence to tradition. The 5 basic pillars of this product to advance and maintain deliberate tradition were these 5. So 5 main aspects of maintaining deliberate tradition. Smith's way of framing the main ideas and contributions of Confucius. So 5 main aspects. One is the idea of Ren, or some call it Zhen, depending on the translation. And that's just the virtue of humaneness and benevolence to your fellow man. Okay. The second one is, make sure I got it, Chun Tzu, I believe. This is on page 172 of the text, so if you want to look for it there. Try to be a quote-unquote Chun Tzu, which is just the phrase used to refer to a superior, but really more accurately, mature person, mature human being. An ideal host, a kind of quality that you would have as an ideal host, always accommodating to others, thinking about what they need, being noble and of proper bearing. The third aspect of this deliberate tradition is Li, which is to refer to proper order. Proper order in a few ways: in the way we use language, in the way we achieve balance in our lives, in respect for the 5 constant relationships mentioned before, and love and honor of one's family and of all elders. The fourth major aspect of maintaining the deliberate tradition mentality is Bei, and that just means power, the power of rulers specifically in this context. So to properly wield power without oppressing others, to have love for the people when you rule and when you sit in a position of high authority such that they consent to the rule, and they're not just being ruled by force or by oppressive means. And the fifth and final aspect of this deliberate tradition, maintenance and stability of that, is Wen. And Wen just refers to the arts of peace. The arts of peace include things like music, art, poetry. And that's contrasted with the arts of war. Confucianism says that if we want to live the right way, we have to cultivate a kind of tradition, and we have to do it intentionally in a conscious and deliberate way. We can do that when we instill within ourselves the virtue of humaneness and benevolence to others, when we use that to guide our behavior and act in an accommodating and graceful way that makes us a superior, mature person. We will then use that behavior to properly order the world and society, whether it's in the case of the way we use language, the way we balance our personal lives, or the way that we respect others and the 5 fundamental relationships. Rulers should apply the same principles to their statecraft, showing love and care for their subjects and not ruling in a way that's oppressive. And finally, we should all advance, support, and subsidize the arts of peace, because those also conduce to a well-ordered and harmonious society. So that's everything I had for you guys from both Coogan and Smith on the Chinese traditions. We'll be back soon. The next lecture I'll post over the weekend, and then we will get started with the last of our major world religious discussions of the Japanese traditions. From there, we will focus for a little while on different arguments about the existence of God and criticisms of those. So for now, guys, I really appreciate all your time and efforts. If you do need anything at any time, just let me know. But I'm going to let you guys go for the moment, and just have a great one, and we'll be in touch soon. Okay, thanks again.